Well, thank you very much, everyone, for being here. Thank you, David, for the kind but somewhat biased introduction because you are a co-author on this paper. And certainly to Karen and her team at Rotman Management magazine for the opportunity to share some of this research and some prescriptions on your end of things. Let me begin by asking, do we remember when 40 million was a big number? Right? It seems like prehistoric times. I'm going back to 2013, 6 whole years. Right, this was the Adobe breach where 40 million records were taken, 40 million people's personal information was affected, and we thought this was cataclysmic. Right? There were editorials demanding that we protect consumer data. There were prescriptions in magazines like Rotman Management that says we need to do something about this. This is a growing problem. And so what's happened in the time since? Well, we've gotten better. Right? So it's not total gloom and doom. And I promise that there will be an upswing in the mood after I get done. There's a lot of tremendous negativity surrounding this particular problem, but things at the same time also got much worse. And so if I then take you forward 6 years to a series of breaches, you'll see that they only get bigger and faster. In fact, the first 4 circles are proportional, but if I were to take the Adult Friend Finder and Marriott breach 2018, 500 million records, that would be greater than that slide. But of course, it doesn't eclipse the granddaddy of them all, which is the Yahoo breach in 2012 of 3 billion records, 3 billion email records. If I were to put that as a proportional slide to all of these other circles, I would have a 6-foot diameter circle in front of me. And they're not just taking your login passwords. They're not just taking the pet's name that you use for all of your accounts. They're grabbing things. Well, in the Marriott breach, they were grabbing your social security number, your social insurance number. They were grabbing your passport information. They were grabbing all sorts of credentials and then using that and reselling that. And so, one of the first assertions that we make in this article is that we are living in an era of big breaches. Right? They're inevitable. They will happen, and they will get bigger all the time as this carries on. Part of the reason is that it's a perfect storm, and we sort of outline this in the article, of 3 converging forces. Number 1, the bad guys, they're good, they're getting better. Right? The threat actors are out there, they're active. In fact, we have evidence that threat actors criminals have gone to take on their MBAs and are organizing themselves in criminal collectives. No, they've got hierarchies, they've got an organization chart with the VP in charge of this, the senior VP in charge of that, and so they are approaching our organizations in a systemic way to extract information of value. The tools they use. Right, the tools they use themselves, the attack vectors as we call them, are getting increasingly complex and sophisticated, and this is a daily thing. The vectors that we see tomorrow will be substantially different than the vectors we see today. And in fact, most attacks and most breaches that you see today are the result of customized attack vectors, and so they are targeting your organization. The play is also slightly different. Right, if I were to go back to 2013 in Adobe, I would characterize that as more of a smash and grab kind of attack, right, where we go in with a brute force attack, we grab whatever we can, and we get out before they catch us. Not anymore. Right, the average attack now takes sometimes months to unfold because they will go in, the criminals will go in, and they will look. They will understand your system. They will understand the structure. They will understand your culture. They'll understand your norms. Right? We look at that phishing emails. Why do phishing emails get sent? Well, because they work. Because they work. Right? We can mock, if somebody has a constant spelling mistake in their emails. We can actually get that by gleaning a year's worth of their emails and then imitate that. And so the attack vectors are becoming more complex and more customized to you and your organization and your culture. And unfortunately, we are increasingly vulnerable targets. Increasingly vulnerable targets. Our responses, more often than not, are bad. Right? The first response is denial. Until then, we're given incontrovertible proof that says, no, actually, this breach happened because we found this. Okay, it happened, but it wasn't our fault. Okay, it happened, it was our fault, but here's what we're doing about it. Right? And so it becomes really a messed transmission and poor messaging. And as a result of that, how do we feel as consumers? We feel betrayed. We feel betrayed. We feel, on the one hand, somewhat fatalistic that it's inevitable and therefore I may as well get used to the fact that my personal information is going to be out there for someone to use at some point in time, or we get angry. And I think that those are both righteous emotions, but it forces us to do something about it. This year, the FBI expects there will be a cyber incident every 14 seconds in North America. And so far, they've been right. They've been right. And so it is going to happen. And that's point number one, is that a breach is inevitable. But here's the thing. We may not be able to do much about the threat actors and the attack vectors, but one thing we do know is that we can do something about ourselves. Right? We can do something about our own vulnerability as an organization, as individuals, and that's really the latter part of the article, is to take a look at what that is. Let me spend a bit of time on who they are and what they try to do. One of the things that we try to do is to sort of understand who these criminals are and why they are doing this, right? And we've built sort of a, pick your metaphor of choice, a pyramid, a layer cake, a parfait perhaps, of criminals, but they range all the way down on the bottom from what we call script kiddies. That is deliberately pejorative. It's deliberately insulting. These are low-skilled individuals with poor impulse control that attack you in multitudes. But the problem is, if 10,000 of them decide tomorrow is a good day to attack your organization, you've got a problem to deal with. If we go up, crime gets involved in the act, and it is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Do not kid yourself. There's a lot of money to be made in fraud and in identity theft and in stealing and reselling data. Whether you do so on your own or through organized crime, you now can, in fact, buy crime as a service. Software as a service was the big thing of the 1990s. We now have crime as a service, where you can actually buy attack scripts and attack vectors on the internet. All the way up through terrorists that get in terms of infrastructure, and at the top of our pyramid, which is perhaps the most single largest threat, are what we call APTs, Advanced Persistent Threats. And that is nation-state sponsored hacking, which in our economy is basically three countries: the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, the People's Republic of China, and Russia, who have attacked and stolen intellectual property. And there's also considerable evidence to suggest that they have tried to manipulate our democratic institutions in the form of elections. And so the paradox is that the ones at the bottom, there's thousands of them, millions of them. They're not a big threat individually, but collectively they represent a threat. The ones at the top are few, but they represent a rather severe threat. So, all this to say that, in fact, what can you do about this? Well, that's really what we try to get at in the article. Because, a systemic recognition that this is a problem, that this is something that needs to be addressed, and the will to address a substantial difference, not only in terms of preventing these easy attacks, but also in terms of recovering well when they do happen. And so we suggest that there are really four things as an organization that you can do. The first is all about culture, right? Peter Drucker famously said that culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? And the question becomes, is there in fact a cybersecurity culture in your organization? Are we security aware? Have we even defined what security means, what cybersecurity means in our organization? Do we take means to ensure that we enact those steps, that we actually live that? And it's about the what, right? What does this mean? Who will be contacted if an incident happens? How will they be contacted? When will they be contacted? And how do we deal with these things? And how do we adopt a cybersecurity mindset everywhere in the organization? That simple act makes a substantial difference. The second thing, though, is perhaps the greatest value-adding step, and that is to understand what is of value in your organization. But more importantly, and this is a distinction that we make in the article, a lot of cybersecurity consultants will tell you you need to have sort of a good granular DNA-level understanding of what the crown jewels are. In other words, the data that we possess, process, and pass on. We go one step further and suggest you need to look at it from the criminal's point of view. And you look at it from a criminal's point of view as to what is of value to a criminal, right? A password may not be a high value, but when I add it to other pieces of information as a criminal that I've gleaned from other places, I can build a profile that I can then use to do a number of different things. And so think like a criminal is the advice that we give you. Think like a criminal about what is of value to these criminals and what data you possess, process, and pass on. One recent study concluded that the average organization passes on data to over 175 outside parties. Each one of those parties is a potential point of weakness and a potential threat to the security of your data and of your organization. And so understanding what that value is becomes the second thing to do. Once you know the value, well, you enact it in what we call a cyber breach playbook. Right? In a cyber breach playbook, the best way to describe it is it's a living, breathing document that is known, permeated, and forms the very fabric of the organization. It says, who are the potential attackers in our industry, in our organization, in our particular sector of the economy, in our particular geography? Where will they come from? When will they come? How will they come at us? And then you rehearse, rinse, wash, repeat, right? You constantly rehearse this. Good cyber breach playbooks live in everybody's head and in everybody's heart. They're not what we somewhat pejoratively call credenzaware, right? The mythical dust-gathering binder on the shelf somewhere that somebody dusts off once a year when the auditors come in and say, do you have a cyber breach playbook? And we answer, yes, we do. Right? Here it is. Right? And so you rehearse constantly, and you enact this when these breaches occur and when just small incidents happen. Some simple things, like, for example, an organization that says, in the case of a cyber breach incident, we ask that the senior management team be contacted by email. One organization I was working with, the attack was on the email server. They didn't have phone numbers. They didn't have phone numbers. And so they did not know about the attack happened on a Saturday morning. The senior management team did not know about it until Monday. And so the hackers had unfettered access to this organization's crown jewels for an entire weekend. And that's part of the problem. And so you rehearse that. By the way, they went back, and now every single executive has got a landline in their home. They went back to landlines because they know that those are secure if the mobile goes down or if the email server does go down. So the cyber breach playbook really is the third thing. The last thing then to do is to constantly monitor and review, right? To constantly practice this, to constantly test inside your organization and engaging in phishing tests, engaging in smishing tests, understanding what the differences are between minor events and critical incidents, and organizing yourselves accordingly. Working within your organization, working with your competitors to collaborate and share information, and working with the authorities. And one of the pitches that we have is for the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, which is a recently created organization by the federal government that is a repository of attacks and helps organizations both ways. You do all of these things, well, really, you will be better than the average bear. And what we really try to do in the article is to step away from the negative discourses, right? To step away from this fatalism that surrounds this issue and offer some tangible prescriptions to organizations, to leaders, on how to address this and how to have these conversations with their organizations and with their employees. U.S. Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis famously said that sunshine is the strongest of disinfectants. Bringing these conversations out into the open cannot help but improve practice, and in doing so will result in better organizations, better protected individuals, and ultimately a safer society. We look forward to your comments on the feedback, and again, thank you for the opportunity.